Hello and welcome. Well, the start to the 2021 school year was unlike any other our children have ever experienced, as their life experiences of 2020 and just COVID in general meant there was much more than just the contents of their school bags that they were carrying on their shoulders. I don't know about you, but I'm a glass half full kind of gal. That said, I'm also a realist too. So today we're going to take the time to flesh out and really analyze on a broad perspective what the experiences of COVID have meant for our children with a focus on their mental health. To do so, we welcome our special guest, Chanel Nesci, a registered psychologist and psychological health and safety leader at BUPA, with almost 10 years of experience working in mental health. Thank you for joining us, Chanel. How are you?
I'm good, Rachel. How are you?
Yeah, very excited to be talking to you about this topic, and just grateful, I think, from the perspective that in this day and age that we are so much more open to having robust discussions about mental health. It's something that I think everyone in some way, shape, or form has had an experience with mental health, either personally and or through their family. My family itself has had some serious mental health issues, and it was always swept under the carpet, and it was a faux pas. One of those things that you just couldn't speak about. And I'm so grateful that we are at a point in history now that we can speak about it, especially with the experiences around COVID and naturally around what that means for our children in the short, middle, and long term. Now here we are, of course, at the end of term one. So this particular discussion is not to address any typical back to school jitters and anxiety, as the article that we published for you, so kindly addresses. What I'm really interested to chat to you about today is the impact of COVID. As mentioned before, what is that on their mental health in the short, middle, and long term? But also, what do you see as being some, initially some positive takeaways for us to appreciate? So I'd love to know, what are your thoughts just overall?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to pick up on a point that you just mentioned before around mental health and how far we've come as a society. And I think that the people that are going to benefit from that the most are going to be our children, our next generation, because we as adults, we as parents, we as a community are just so much more aware and open to the benefits of really talking about mental health and intervening early if there are any conditions or any signs of people not coping. And that absolutely applies to our children, which actually makes me feel really excited about the future that they could have, based on the fact that we've got all this amazing information available to us. We're slowly working on reducing the stigma around mental illness, and we're really trying to bring this concern, which impacts a lot of us, as you mentioned. We're really trying to get on top of it and to help ultimately them to lead a better life than potentially some of our counterparts did, because of all of those things that weren't ever spoken about. So I think for me, as parents, as adults, as a community, we have such a role to play in the lives of our children and their mental health, and a positive experience around this topic moving forward. And COVID probably just accelerated those conversations more than we could have ever imagined. And not everything was positive from COVID at all. There were a number of challenges and negative experiences that many of us had in some way, shape, or form. But I think if we can take anything from it, it's the conversation starter, and the fact that, we've probably all learned a lot more about this topic and a lot of skills to move forward in a really positive way.
Totally agree. And it's been an incredibly challenging time emotionally for children. They've experienced stuff that we by no means have ever thought we would. We obviously didn't experience any of this stuff in our childhood. So a lot of adults have naturally found it challenging to be able to empathize, I think, with a lot of what some, children have been going through. It's also important for us, I think, to be mindful and just grateful how lucky we are here in Australia in comparison to other parts of the world. I think that's a really important point for us to touch on, given that we do have an audience overseas as well. And so we are empathetic, and our hearts go out to family and friends in the UK and in Europe and in the States and everywhere else, as we, are constantly reminded of just the challenges that they're still sort of working through. But nonetheless, for our Aussie sort of children here, the impact on our children's lives is still relative. to their little bubble, I guess. And by no means here in Australia we're not through the woods yet. So we've still got a lot of work to be doing here, but it's really great to be like just discussing your thoughts on what our key learnings are at the moment. So in saying that, I'd like to maybe just start with what the good news and the positives that we can take from this experience so far on our mental health. From your view, what are some of the positives that children can take away from the last 12 months? Starting with like preschoolers. I mean, they from a positive perspective, they understand how to wash their hands properly now with great appreciation for hygiene. So for all parents, that's a big tick, which is great. And many of the younger children attending childcare and long day care really wouldn't know the difference between life before and after COVID hit. But for those attending kindergarten in that sort of that 3 and 4-year-old sort of kindy space, I'd love to know, like, what are your thoughts on the positives this time has actually brought to their lives?
Yeah, and I think, when we're talking about positives and negative experiences around any sort of challenge or situation that we're faced, it's so individual. And I think that in some cases, it's really quite dependent on the child that we're talking about. What one child might find really beneficial, for example, to be to have had some time away from school and be at home or surrounded by their family, depending on their circumstances, their home lives, the situation that their parents may be in and facing. That might have been quite a negative experience for some children, but in some ways, some children probably spent more time with their families and parents than they ever would have had before, which can actually be really a great positive experience. So I think it's really situation dependent and personality dependent as well. I absolutely agree that I think our learning curve and our children's learning curve around, keeping each other safe and well, and the sentiment around that has definitely been something that has never really had as much of a focus on before. And I think the thing around COVID was that it was something that we all, even though each state, even in Australia, to varying degrees, experienced different things, it was something that we collectively experienced together. And that sense of togetherness and that sense of let's work to move forward as a society, as a community, even within classes and schools and childcares and kindergartens. I think that there definitely was a sense of togetherness throughout that time, especially throughout the most difficult times. And in Victoria in particular, I think we're definitely in Australia hit the hardest. So I think there are a number of life skills that children learned that would never have been forced upon us, I think, in a different space or different time. And, touching on your point around some of our other countries that are far, far more impacted than we have been, I think that it's probably difficult to see positives at the moment in some situations because, it has been a really tragic time. People have lost friends, lost contact with people, lost family members in different ways, shapes or forms. So I'd like to acknowledge that as well, and that I hope that the recovery from this is a positive one, and that the support needed is accessed.
Yes,
because I do think there will be long-term kind of implications of what we've been through, and having that glass half full I guess perspective is really, really great. And I think that would be helpful for a number of people, but it might feel a little bit impossible right now. And getting that support to try and get that perspective might be necessary for children and adults alike. So I think that sometimes it's hard to see the positives in certain situations, but I feel here we're probably hopefully through the worst of it. And we can,
I agree. And as you mentioned before, definitely for our preschoolers, this time, as you mentioned before, has really enabled the ability to form even stronger bonds with parents, being home in lockdown. And I guess, look, for the many children who were kept at home and out, kept at home, I guess, with reduced access to educators. Do you, as a general question, do you think that this time has enabled greater development of their imaginations as they've looked to find items around the home to keep their brains active, and I guess the ability for the imagination and lateral thinking and all of that exciting stuff away from screens, that we always say and know that is so important for and crucial for children's development? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd really like to think that that would be something that benefited many children throughout this time. I think at the same time we had a lot of parents working from home and trying to manage that, and may not necessarily have had the time. And I can relate to this absolutely. May not necessarily have had the time to commit to making sure their kids weren't on screens and were able to practice positive things through their probably what would have been quite a boring time for them throughout that time. So yes, I think there's definitely the opportunity for children to find ways to entertain themselves throughout boredom. But I absolutely want to acknowledge the parents who were really reliant on screen time just to get through their work day, for example. And yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think it's quite dependent on how much parents were able to facilitate that as well, especially for younger children. I think for older children and children who were probably more able to, I guess, have control over their own day with their age, they probably had some opportunity where screen time got quite boring, and therefore they did source other activities to keep them entertained and not going, a bit stir crazy inside. So yeah, it's a really interesting question. I'd love to see some of the research that comes out based on lockdowns and based on this time, if people are looking into that. I think it will be.
And many experts do say it's very important for children to be left to be bored, to exactly for this point, for them to be able to then use their imaginations and develop greater critical lateral thinking, to think outside the box. And loose parts play is something that's a very big and important part for children, taking things out of cupboards, which is always not a great thing for parents necessarily, but to be able to use things around the home to be able to explore and expand their minds. But I'd love to move on to what your thoughts are on primary schoolers. Their transition to online learning meant that they really developed skills and the ability to adapt very quickly to new situations, which I think is an important life skill which they learnt very, very quickly. But I'd love to know also, following on from that, do you think that this time has developed for our preschoolers a greater appreciation for just their friends and their friendships as well?
Yeah, definitely. I've heard from some of my colleagues and friends with older children at that sort of primary school age that some really struggled with being at home and not having that social connection. And I think, again, that was really dependent on the nature of their child. Are they introverted, are they extroverted naturally? But I think everyone needs connection. Children need connection, and having the that time away from having that in some states, in some situations, having quite a lengthy time away from that, being homeschooled and then going back into it, probably that adjustment. So we had to adjust out of it, and then we had to adjust back into it. So I think for children, any type of adjustment, any type of change to routine is something that often is a bit of a shock to the system, and seeing children adapt. And I really want to say that some children probably adapted almost seamlessly and some didn't, and that's absolutely normal. Some struggled, whether it was with the transition out or the transition in, or both transitions, because they are transitions and they are hard for children, and some adults as well find change and transitioning just a bit of a personal challenge. So I'm sure parents with multiple children probably had their own children reacting quite differently to this time as well. So I think it's also a good opportunity for parents to get a bit of a sense of their child's personality and how they cope, and help them with strategies moving forward based on those things as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, really, really interesting, just to see everyone go through it quite uniquely and differently.
Your view on a greater appreciation for their teachers also, and just the structure having such, firm structure with needing to be in school a certain time, and you've got your recess, and you've got your lunch and all of those types of things. Your day has such strong structure to be able to move with, homeschooling. Do you think that this time has helped develop a greater appreciation for their teachers and structure in general, or not? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think it has. And I think it's probably helped parents have a greater appreciation for teachers as well, because it's a
Absolutely.
tough gig. um, yeah, for sure. And, being that teacher and being that person that children probably spend, and teachers, depending on the age, how many people that they interact with in a school or preschool environment. I think, you're a real solid person in that child's life. So that attachment is there, and not having it is probably quite a shock initially, but then having it back would hopefully feel really good. And that's really also dependent on the relationship between child and teacher as well. And I think that having that face-to-face contact, as we've all probably felt now transitioning to work from home in many cases, that face-to-face contact is really important.
And do you think the change in their schedules and just day-to-day structure had an effect on their mental health at all, or not? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think initially any sort of change, probably for many people, and we probably can feel it as an adult as well, and the impact of us all of a sudden having to go from being in a really busy office, having so much connection, interaction every day, to going to work from home. I think it's absolutely the same for our children, regardless of how they reacted to that or externally expressed their concerns or their feelings, or whether they loved it or hated it or whatever it might be. I do think that there will always be some sort of adjustment because of that change. In terms of the mental health impact, again, going and I often think, what would my daughter be feeling right now? What would I feel, or how do I react in a situation like that? And I think it's quite the same. They're just littler, younger versions of ourselves who haven't had the opportunity to learn how to cope with challenges, or learn how to understand what's going on, and the fact that there is an endpoint to this and it will get better or it won't. I think their little minds are just going into overdrive at times, and again, some kids may have just absolutely rolled with it, just like some adults rolled with it, and then some may have really struggled. So from a mental health perspective, I would hope that their needs were met from a support perspective. The other thing about kids, they're really resilient as well, probably more so than what we are. And I think if they've got a safe place to go, or a predictable person to be that sort of constant in their lives throughout times like this, and throughout change and transition, I think that really does support positive mental health outcomes as well.
And, still on the topic of structure, do you think, COVID has meant for all of us, we've had so many additional rules and regulations, and we've all had to colour inside the lines. Here in Victoria, of course, with an extended lockdown and everything that we've been through, even more so, understanding that, if you had family that lived outside of a 5-kilometre radius, you couldn't see them, all of those things. So COVID has really brought into our lives, definitely even more so in these sort of, democratic sort of societies where we've been able to have, the freedoms that we have, to all of a sudden have these such strong rules and regulations. Do you think that this has actually helped children to understand the importance of following rules and regulations more so, and help them to become better behaved, or not? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. It's a hard one to say, because I feel like some people are naturally inclined to push against rules and regulations because it feels quite restricted. But
you see that. You still see people that are just their own way. Here in Victoria, we still have to wear masks inside supermarkets and those things, and people are just so blatant about it. They just no. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. Continue. No, that's all right. So I'm trying to think. I think depending on the age of the child, I feel like no matter what rule or regulation you have to put in place, or you have to follow, it really does need to come with some sort of valid explanation and understanding of how that might impose difficulties or challenges for that child going through those. I think as well, another example of that is children who may have had a lot of contact with grandparents and extended family and then weren't able to see them at certain ages, you can understand that and accept that. But at younger ages, it does feel like quite a difficult concept to grasp. So I think explaining why those things are in place and talking to your children about how they feel about that and acknowledging their emotions and their difficulties and trying to give them positive coping methods to get through that time and get through some of those internal conflicts they'd probably be feeling because they don't really understand it, would be helpful. But whether it makes them more compliant or less compliant, I don't know. Interesting thought.
Yeah. Well, and onto the subject of teens now as well. I mean, do you think the time out of lockdown has really helped a lot of teens, like help them appreciate just their social freedoms in general and that sort of stuff as well, on the back of the discussion of, like, what we were just talking about?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think now coming out of lockdown, all of a sudden we had probably a number of months where things were quite quiet, extracurricular activities didn't occur. We couldn't really go out and have barbecues with friends or go and do things and go out to people's houses. And now returning to normal, especially for Victoria, it probably feels like all at once, all of these things are back on and I have to go to swimming and then I have to go to dance and then I have to go to my friend's house and then I've got this on and that on. When we didn't have that for so long, I can imagine that it's definitely appreciated, but it might also feel quite exhausting in that transition and that adjustment. And that's for parents as well that are running around with their kids doing these things when they probably felt like they had a little bit of a break from all those things for a while. And as much as
quite a few interviews and discussions during that lockdown period exactly on that topic. So yes, that's for sure.
Yeah, interesting. No, so I feel like, teens are probably absolutely feeling grateful that they can get out and about, but they might also be feeling a little bit fatigued by it as well and might take a bit of getting used to. And maybe some families have gone, you know what, I liked the slower pace of that life. It really brought us closer or brought us a bit of downtime and time to really look after ourselves and care for ourselves in a different way. And maybe that they have brought those new ways of life into
post-lockdown life.
Lockdown life, which I think is absolutely great. And if you are kind of feeling a bit, as parents and as a family, if you are feeling a bit overwhelmed with everything going back to normal, stop and think, well, what can I stop?
See, there are positives.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say there would be in that way, because that downtime and that relaxation time is really important as well for kids and adults alike.
And also with regards to teens, and I guess not just here in Australia but anywhere globally, it's helped them possibly to develop virtues such as self-motivation and focus and commitment and diligence. Because if you don't necessarily have a teacher, sort of looking over your shoulder, sort of pushing you in different classes every day and all those things, this has really given the ability that when you are home, that you do need to have this self-motivation and an ability to have focus as opposed to sort of being all over the place. Do you think that is a positive? And do you think that they've had the ability to be able to develop this virtue, or this is only for a selected few that are just naturally inclined to be sort of higher achievers?
Yeah, I think that it was probably almost an opportunity to determine for a lot of teens and their parents as well around, what drives them, what motivates them, whether that drive is an internal self-driven, don't need that external kind of encouragement or pressure or structure. And then for others, it might just be, and it's absolutely fine if it is, it might be something where that guidance and that sort of external support really did help with staying focused and getting the work done. So I do really feel for some of those more senior year levels, because I think that if there was any time to learn it, probably wouldn't be in your final year at school, but that's what we were dealt, that's what we were given. I can't imagine me as a year 12 student being in that situation, because I know that especially then, it's quite different now, but especially back then, my internal drives were definitely driven by the structure around me and my teachers and and, you know, working alongside my friends. So I can't imagine being at home and feeling as motivated or driven to achieve. So I think, it's a hard one. And I think some people maybe developed the skill, especially when they had the time to. In Victoria, we had such a long time to try and develop that skill, and hopefully felt supported by their online learning and their parents and things like that. But I can absolutely also appreciate how difficult that could have been as well for many.
Now, so we've, I guess, just discussed and shared, I guess, all of the, you know, from a positive perspective, some key learnings that we've taken out of our COVID experiences so far. But I'd love to be able to just touch on now just the cons, I guess. And initially, lots of questions to ask you in this perspective from a mental health perspective. But, you know, firstly, do you think that children find it much more difficult to express how they are feeling to their parents and anyone around them? What's your thoughts?
I think it really depends on the relationship that child feels with the people around them, the openness and internal openness to share those feelings. Some people are quite closed and may not feel safe or comfortable to share that, and that's not necessarily just because of their external environment. That's us as people. Everyone is at slightly different levels of comfortability to share their, you know, emotional thoughts or share anything that they might feel they might be, whatever that might be, which is why it's really important from an external environment perspective, and this is workplaces, schools, homes, communities, to talk about things like mental health and mental illness in a way where we encourage people to normalise it and say, you know, this is something that many of us may experience throughout our lives. Sorry, my headphone just fell out. That many of us may experience throughout our lives, or know someone that does experience throughout our lives. So the more we can make it an inviting and open society, so that people do actually feel like, hey, I need help right now, I'm really struggling, sooner rather than later, is really important. So I do think, in answer to your question, yes, some people might have gone through the COVID struggle quite feeling quite isolated, especially because they may have been quite isolated from the people. And I think as children, and as especially teenagers, the people we confide in are our friends. If we haven't been able to see them as much, or we haven't had that really intimate time with them like we would every day at school, that's a connection that we may not feel is the same over video call or over phone or over, you know, whatever chat they're using these days, which I don't want to guess because I'll probably get it wrong. Facebook, that's still a thing, right? So I think that I think absolutely probably impaired people's ability to reach out to those who they wanted to connect to and express their kind of concerns and difficulties with. But I think that's just more enlightening for us as the people modelling our community and our society to really get the word out that there is help and support out there, and there's absolutely reasons to reach out to that, because if it is feeling a bit dark and not going so well at the moment, you can get the support to make it better.
Very important. And also, I mean, what does it involve from parents and caregivers to make sure that they can identify signs of stress in their children?
Yeah, really good question. I think it involves education. It involves working out as parents and caregivers what are some of the signs that might determine whether or not your child is struggling with their mental health. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have a diagnosable mental illness, but it might mean that they just need a bit more support to prevent them from going further down that mental health continuum. And a lot of that is indicated by changes in behaviour. So spending the time to be present and observe and know your children, and that's easier said than done in our busy lives, especially when we might have financial pressures based on, you know, COVID-related job loss and things like that. I really want to acknowledge that all of this sounds so simple, but I completely appreciate everyone's different situations and different circumstances. So I think the most we can do is to carve out a little bit of time in each day to try and have a chat to our children, which might be really hard because some children just don't talk, especially those teenagers that are going through their own sort of journey. But as parents, creating safe spaces and not putting too much pressure, but just being there and being present and acknowledging how they may be feeling in a way that's not overly reactive. So you can let them feel listened to, let them feel heard, and try as much as parents we might feel quite quick to say, oh no, don't do that, or why are you doing that for, or place judgment, and it's all purely from a place of wanting them to be safe and well, but sometimes that can put them off talking to us. So I guess reserving that judgment, or reserving those initial comments and reactions to try and really understand what's going on for them and how we can possibly give them a safe place to continue talking to us, and then work out what the best avenue of support is for them. I think as well, reaching out for support as parents as well is really important, and getting that advice, because sometimes we really want to get it right, but we've got so much else going on, and we might be blurred by our own experiences and our own things that are happening in our lives. Sometimes just getting that external person through a support line, or through a friend or a family member, or a child psychologist, and a psychologist specifically for you, or a counsellor, kids helpline, things like that. I think accessing all the things that we have, and it's amazing because we have them now, right, is really important to make sure you're supported, to be able to provide the best possible support to them.
Yes. And I'd love to know from your perspective, what or how do, the signs of stress differ child to child, especially with that lens on mental health?
Yeah. They can be incredibly different depending on the child, and that's where I come back to, has this person or this child or this teenager changed? Are they more irritable? Some may be more irritable, some may be more withdrawn, some may have been getting quite reasonable grades, and then all of a sudden their grades are dropping off, risk-taking behaviour or rebellious behaviour, anything like that a lot of the time we just pass off as that's them being a teenager, and we all probably went through similar stages, but sometimes it can be something going on a little bit deeper and just need a really supportive conversation, and a check-in around, hey, what's going on here? And as parents, maybe you might want to delegate that conversation to someone at the school that they're at. Be really open and use the people and the supports around you to do that, because sometimes they might be more inclined to open up to someone else that may not necessarily be you, or a close family friend or another relative, or something like that would be helpful. But I think in terms of differences between children, they can be very, 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 very different, depending on the nature of the child and the personality, and yeah, it's difficult to navigate. Parents definitely have it tough.
And just talking about some of the negative effects of COVID on our preschoolers, so much of early education and care, as we know, is not about the education, and they're learning so much of their 1, 2s and 3s and ABCs per se. It's really about forming their social skills and the ability to connect with other children. Now, for children who, potentially missed out on this over the last 12 months and globally as well, how do you see this affecting their mental health, and what can parents do to help this?
I think that will be quite variable depending on the child's experience throughout that time, based on what were they able to do at home, or did they have other ways of connecting with children and things like that. I think something that you might see in the short term is that readjustment back into a care environment, and that separation from parents might be quite difficult for the child to who may have been quite used to being in that sort of environment, all of a sudden being at home for a while and then having to go back. It takes a while for any child to adjust to that, even from day to day, let alone after having such a long break. So I think that might feel like a really difficult transition back for some parents and some children. It's like any sort of start of a child's journey into care and away from parents. That separation can always be a bit of a tough one for some kids than others as well, and more for some parents than others. I found it difficult to drop my child off when I first started her in care. So I think that in terms of the mental health impacts, again, I come back to the fact that our children really are really resilient, and I would hope that they had that support and that love and that safe place outside of that school environment at home to not see too much from a detrimental perspective at that age group, because I feel like if they can get that warmth and that support and that consistency through other channels, then hopefully they would, whilst again in that short term it might be really quite difficult, we would really be able to support them to get through that time at that age. And it's really, I would hope to see that.
And with that, I mean, children are naturally inquisitive creatures and very fast learners. As we know, over 90% of their brain forms before the age of 5, and this is a really crucial part of their development when these neural pathways are being formed. And do you think that with the understanding of in their own way of COVID and what it means, do you think that some children may have, as their brains are forming and all these neural pathways are being created, that they're likely to maybe have some phobia to germs and those types of things later on in life? Do you think that that's a possibility?
Oh, look, I think that's a possibility for all of us as someone who has a bit of that type of phobia myself. I think it's one of those things where some of those long-term responses for everyone going through such a difficult time, and I again want to acknowledge that overseas will probably feel this quite a bit harder than what we may feel that effect here. But I do think that some of those residual impacts of wash your hands and don't touch that person and stay 1.5 meters away absolutely might take a bit of time of to get used to and hopefully not feel that anxiety around it. But I feel like I've been a health anxious person for a number of years and had nothing to do with COVID, so it may exacerbate some things, or it may cause some things that maybe wouldn't have been there in the first place. But as long as we can acknowledge when that's becoming something that could be impairing their function or impacting their well-being versus something that might just be a quirky kind of trait, that I think that's where we differentiate between, all right, let's get on top of this early before it does develop into something that could be quite debilitating for them
longer term.
But exactly, so it's just keeping an eye on that, and I'm absolutely an advocate for getting that professional support, even if you're not quite sure whether it's needed. Better to get it early, and hopefully it's not needed for very long than watch and wait, I think, our children. So
as well. And moving on to our primary schoolers, naturally many children over the last 12 months have experienced great disruption to their lives and plans that they had, and lots of disappointment, things like cancellation of their birthday parties, excursions, events, holidays, and all of these things as well is quite heartbreaking to see as well. But, I'd love to know from your perspective with a mental health lens on this, what effects do you think these types of events, if any at all, there might not be any, I'd love to know, things like social isolation, what sort of effects do you think that they're having on the short, middle, and long term with kids? And or is it a case by case scenario?
Yeah, definitely. I would always say most things are a case by case scenario. But I do think that that sometimes with that feeling of disappointment to cancel a birthday or cancel a holiday, and if that has happened a number of times and quite unexpectedly and repetitively for children and for adults as well, you can sometimes feel that hesitation to feel excited about anything or want to plan anything. So I think that that's a natural reaction and response to what's happened. And I'm hoping, again, kids, because of their ages and their resilience, might actually bounce back heaps better than what some adults would with that. I still get a little bit hesitant when I'm planning anything because things can change so quickly. But I can imagine that if something does change for a child as quickly as what we've seen it change, like a birthday party or a holiday, just being there and acknowledging their deep disappointment that it would feel for them, and just being able to help them through those feelings and those emotions and keep them positive for when that event can happen again, is really important for that longer term success of moving through these times. So I think just in the moment, acknowledging any feelings, no matter how deeply emotional a child may be around something that may not seem that big a deal to us as adults. It's really important to put ourselves in the shoes of the child in that case, and just really validate the fact that it is absolutely disappointing, and it's something that, you know, we're there for them and we'll
That's
help
why things
them.
are so big for them. That's what they always say, is because they've got nothing else to compare it to, and
Yeah.
obviously limited life experience to adults. So to them, the missing out on something is huge, as opposed to us, when we have perspective from that. You know,
Yeah.
I guess with understanding that, but from a mental health perspective, I just, yeah, thank you for elaborating on that. And following on from this is just something that I've just noticed, and I'd love to just ask your thoughts on it. But just children's ability to initiate and form robust conversations these days, you know, and the potential lack thereof to form deep connections to others through this. You know, do you think that these types of things these days have an effect and impact on children's mental health at all?
I think it really depends on the situation that child might be in at the time. So I try to look at it from a perspective of, if that child's feeling safe and loved and cared for and their needs are being met, then I would hope that those mental health implications, if any, are addressed quickly and are supported. Again, that really depends on a child's personality, and you know, if they are feeling anxious or isolated or having difficulties to transition through some difficult times. I would hope that when we talk about mental health and the long-term implications, I don't want parents to fear that, you know, this time will impact the life of their child or the mental health outcomes of their children moving forward. I think if we can just proactively look out for some of those changes that we talked about, and address them sooner, and create really open relationships where children feel safe to express anything to us, to the best of their ability, even as young kids who may not really understand it. There are a few things, I think, that schools and education is doing a really good job of opening up children's vocabulary and opening up their minds to, you know, expressing their feelings and the positives to this, and giving them the skills to do that. And I think as parents, we can do the same. So I'm hoping with all of those things, our children are going to be set up far better than what, you know, we may have been, or you know, adults these days may have been back if this happened when we were young.
Yeah. I totally agree. So in your view, how can parents keep an eye out for any signs that their children may need some additional support then?
I think it's really important to set up family time or individual time with a parent and the child. If you've got multiple children, that can be really hard, but trying to actually have one-on-one time with each of your children is really important. Getting to know them, getting to understand them better as time goes on, working out, you know, it's really hard sometimes to say, how was your day today? Yeah, good. I was one of those kids. Yeah, good. What do you want to know? I'm too busy on MSN or whatever. I think that trying to set up really good practices as a family unit at home to either eat a meal together or do a puzzle together or play a game together, whatever it might be, to initiate those natural conversations. There are some good tools around, like family talk cards and things like that, where you can try and have conversations that might be facilitated by a certain activity or something, or you might have a ritual where you all go around and say something negative that happened today, but then follow it up with what you're grateful for that happened today, things like that, and trying to set up those practices as a family. But you get it so much easier said than done when you're just trying to juggle everything and you're getting home late and you've got dinner to do and you've got
life,
and you've got so much on your plate. But I do think that even 15 minutes of a dedicated routine, again, kids, we know they thrive off routine and predictability. So even if you can do that as much as possible, and help them build those neurological pathways of gratitude and get them expressing those things, can be really helpful as
Important.
parents to be able to spot if there is anything changing or if there might be anything going on that needs a bit more attention.
Yes. And, just touching on teens and that sort of stuff as well, we know they've really dived deeper into the virtual world and building their connections in online space even more so. But I just wanted just briefly just for you to elaborate on just, I guess, on the long-term effects of loneliness that potentially that teens may have experienced and I guess in the short, middle and long term also.
Yeah, loneliness is a hard one because I think especially for those teen years where you're not just getting your connections from your immediate family and your siblings and your friends and extended networks are absolutely so important, and social media is such a big part of life. I think that loneliness it's quite a sad and debilitating feeling for anyone. Yes. And for teens, it's probably something that they may or may not be able to acknowledge as I'm lonely. So I think education for parents around what is feeling lonely and how can you feel more a part of something, more connected to something. And I think especially with some of those extracurricular activities that stopped throughout the time of COVID, where people felt that real belonging into a team or into an activity that they loved and they did, but probably not so much because of the activity, but because of what it brought them surrounding it. And that stopping for a while maybe did really start bringing up feelings of, loneliness or loss of that particular joy that it brought for children and teens specifically. So I think just education around, what is loneliness and how can we combat it? And adults, again, I'm not just speaking for children here, I'm speaking for adults too. It's really important because it is a distinct feeling that's not necessarily a mental health concern or a mental health issue. It obviously impacts our mental health, but it's not a mental illness, for example. But it's definitely something that requires attention because it can negatively impact our mental health as well. So, and social isolation and all of that would have had an impact on that. And it's not a nice feeling to have. And I'm sure everyone has felt lonely at some point in their lives. But I think that, chronic loneliness is something that really definitely needs to be attended to and helped.
Agreed. And just flowing on from that, as you were just mentioning parents, we've discussed all the positive and negative effects of the last 12 months on children. So it's really great to finish on parents, but what tips do you have for parents who may have experienced a change in their mental health over the past 12 months? Because naturally they are worried and concerned for their own children, for their family, their extended family, their parents. A lot of parents in this generation are sort of sandwiched, of course, between aging grandparents and, bringing up a family as well. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be kind to yourself, be easy on yourself. We talk about all these great positive parenting techniques, and sometimes that can be a source of, oh, should I be doing more or have I done enough? And I do think that taking that pressure off, and just as long as you're feeling like you're there for your children if they need you, and you may not be following every single Instagram family page and to the absolute T, but I think that just be kind to yourself and know that you being there for your children and caring about your children is absolutely what they need, and that they will really appreciate that. And the fact that you are a parent means that you probably have a lot less time for yourself, but try to carve out a bit of time for you and some self-care, because that's only going to make you be more able to give what you need to give to your family and to your children and to your parents in situations where there is that sandwich situation. So I just want to say all of this in theory just sounds a lot easier said than done, and sometimes that can create some unnecessary pressure. And I just think as long as we're all trying our best to do our best, that's all we can ask from ourselves, and that's all we can really give to our children. And we've got so much out there that's available to us, and and just education is so important, but so is actually just taking some time out to do what you need to do to feel good, and to be able to be there for others as well.
Yeah. But we've covered a lot today. If you were to summarize, I guess, your key messages for anyone watching and listening, what would they be?
I think they would be, let's hope that, especially here in Australia with our experiences, that our children have learned some really great skills and techniques and built some great relationships throughout such a difficult time, and that whilst there might be some negative implications that have come out of COVID, getting really proactive support and not being afraid to do so will help with those negative implications if you are concerned about any for yourself or for your children. So I just think let's try and stay positive, and let's move forward through what has been a challenging time, and try and see what we want to keep from that time and what we're grateful for throughout that time, but also understand that, absolutely, it was not the most positive experience for many of us, but getting help is absolutely not something to fear. And I really encourage everyone to do that in a way that you feel comfortable with, via the support lines that we've got access to, or the channels and the education channels that we've got. So don't feel alone, and also please, as parents, look after yourselves as well.
And if parents want to reach out to find more information and to get more help, even through BUPA as well, whereabouts can they sort of find you guys, and what links should they be following?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kids Helpline is something that is an organisation that we work really, really closely with, and we absolutely endorse. So they've got some amazing resources and amazing supports for children as well. So you can absolutely tell your children that they can call that line if they want. Just, someone that they don't know on the other end of the phone can sometimes be really, really important and helpful for them to just be able to be themselves and say what they want to say without feeling like they're going to put that on someone that they know, and they can get some really good skills and strategies through that line. So I would definitely say that's something that we definitely recommend to go to for parents for children. You can just access it via the internet, and you've got all the information there. So
we definitely have the links through to the Kids Helpline in the show notes. Chanel, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a wonderful chat, and we'll have links to BUPA and, of course, through to the Kids Helpline in the show notes. But thanks again for your time. Take care, and look forward to another chat in the not too distant future. In the meantime, stay safe.
Thank you so much, Rachel. You too.
Take care. Right, bye.
Bye.